A critique of something David Sachs said. Economic argument. Brain dead. November 23rd. David Sachs, a regular bestie on the popular All In podcast, provided an economic argument and viewpoints that I wish to critique as I feel it largely missed the big picture as to the state of the economy and the impact select details will have. Taking place in the November 5th, 2022 episode during the chapter labeled Macro Trends. Sachs expresses sentiment that the economy is slowing and a recession is likely in our near future. He rightly, in my opinion, acknowledges the term recession has largely lost much of its meaning and arguments to its likelihood are not based on a definitional use of the word but rather a more ambiguous sentiment that our economy is becoming worse. To be fair, Sachs' total speaking time on this topic only amounted to a couple minutes. So I expect some of my disagreements may be purely rooted in his thoughts not being fully expressed and unfolded. Nonetheless, I feel his take echoes the broader sentiment around economic conditions, and I want to provide another perspective into the proverbial hive mind as I see it. The basic structure of Sachs' arguments during this episode goes as such, with the recent job losses and an expectation that more are to come in the near future, that this is to support that the economy is going to worsen. Sachs says even to expect a very serious recession in 2023. He gives insight as to the length this economic hardship could last in his advice to companies to expect 2 years of tight capital markets and to be very stringent on spending, watch burn, get to cash flow positive ASAP, just survive. In this brief monologue that evolved into a conversation between the besties, the main piece of evidence being used as to worsening economic conditions was the amount of job losses. This of course is subject to being the recent event in which to comment on, and I don't believe he views this as the sole reason for his economic expectations. It is a detail of many but mentioned in the context of recency and just another reason to expect things to get more gloom. I believe this is a pretty strong representation of what Sachs intended to communicate. Listen for yourself though and create your own takeaway.
But let's just go back to this, the jobs picture for a second. Jason, you asked about this. So there is news this morning that we added 261,000 jobs in October. And obviously, given that there's an election in a few days, then the administration is eager to point to this. But if you dig a little deeper in the report, I just posted the link there, you see in the raw numbers that there's actually 328,000 fewer employed Americans. And the number of unemployed Americans actually increased 306,000. So, and the labor force participation rate declined for the third consecutive month to 62.2%. So, I don't really understand how all these numbers add up, but the point is the data is very mixed, and there's definitely mixed negativity in there. And this feels to me like the last gasp of the bull market where there's this residual job creation. But you look at just what's happened in the last week, where it's Stripe cutting. I mean, Stripe's probably the single highest quality, I think it's probably the most valuable private company in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, SpaceX is.
Oh. Well, SpaceX, okay. But pure software company, they had a 14% cut. You're starting to see now the RIFs really start to pile up. So I think we're at the beginning now of a long cycle of the unemployment rate going up. I mean, it just feels like the economy is slowing so fast. The markets are, they've been puking now for 6 months. It just feels like this is the beginning of a really serious recession.
Yet we had GDP growth. Yet we had job openings.
Well, no, remember
increase.
we had two quarters of net negative GDP growth. This is when we had the debate about what a recession is. It was true that if you looked at growth in nominal terms, it appeared to be strong, and then it was net negative once you subtracted the inflation rate. We said several months ago, or my prediction was a double dip recession where you had this shallow technical recession, then it bounced back in Q3. But now I think we're headed into the second part of it, which is the real recession, a recession characterized by joblessness. And you're starting to see economists say we're going to go from 3-point-something% unemployment rate to say 5 or 6% unemployment next year. So I think we're just beginning to see the job cuts start to add up.
I think this is what Powell meant, which is, he'll take it as far as it takes, and then he can fix it on the back end by reintroducing, quantitative easing and reintroducing lower interest rates to stimulate demand. But there's
what are the odds he gets this right? It seems to me that the Fed has a habit of reacting too slowly. They were too slow to react to inflation. My guess is that they'll be too slow to react to the recession. So we'll end up with a period of rates being higher than they should too long, and then they will correct. They'll drop rates, but that could be 2 years from now. And meanwhile, we could be in a pretty deep recession.
I think you're probably
Here are the
right.
two charts for you to look at: the GDP by quarter, and then after that, the labor participation rate. So there's your GDP.
There was a story in BBC that the Bank of England has now warned that the UK is facing its longest recession since records began. Some of this is getting to be fear porn.
Yeah.
But look, here's what I think is scary about going into a recession is, number one, you don't really know how long it's going to take to get out. We know the average recession lasts about 18 months, but the truth is once it starts, you just don't know. And the second thing is you don't really know who's been stress tested. People claim that they can weather the storm, but the truth is that there's no way to truly simulate a stress test. They claim they can, but the only way is to really subject an institution to that pressure and that stress. And then you see if they come out the other side. So that's the issue is you just going into this, there's a lot of unknown unknowns. And this is why I would just urge founders to be cautious, is because if the recession ends up being shallower and shorter than people expect, great. You'll be surprised to the upside. But if the recession ends up being deeper and longer than expected, you don't want to go out of business. You want to be protected against that. So again, we've been saying this since February and May, but again, I just reiterate, I think it really makes sense for founders to be conservative, prioritize your survival above all else. This recession probably will last about 2 years. You want to make sure you survive it. And to Chamath's point, if you survive it with lower growth, that's fine. You can keep growing on the other end of this thing. But if you go out of business because you grew too fast, then you're not going to get the chance to fix that problem when the recession is over.
What my critique primarily focuses on is to argue job losses are an improvement to the economy, and then also more broadly that economic conditions should be expected to improve. So now, with my ultimate conclusion stated, let me support it. To understand if we should expect an economy to worsen or improve, I think we need to first have an understanding as to what an economy even is. From my own contemplating and deliberating efforts to understand an economy, I have come to view the economy as the meta-machine, the outermost machine of humanity that produces everything we have and make. Then the field of economics is naturally the study of this machine or other meta-machines. Economics is in essence the study of meta-machines. Just as a car is a machine, so too is the economy. That car is a sub-piece to the meta-machine, just as the engine itself is a machine that acts as a sub-piece to the car. And through this lens, the distinction between machine and economy fails to vanish. Economies embed in stacks just as machines embed in stacks, and those stacks transform ultimately to an economy just being one really large machine. When we start viewing the economy as a machine, it becomes a bit more apparent on how to assess its current form as improving or degrading. Additionally, since the definition of a recession is seemingly needing to be rewritten, this might be the right framing in which to measure a recession or not. Has the meta-machine that produces all of society's goods and services become capable of producing more, fewer, or the same amount of goods and services? If the machine that makes all the stuff we have is capable of making more things, it would constitute economic growth, and if less, a recession. So through this lens we can ask, do job losses make the machine better or worse? First, we should try to understand the nature and reason for the job cuts. Either these jobs are performing labor that some amount of our society's production directly roots from and is dependent on, or production remains unchanged whether the job is performed or isn't. But for causal relationship. But for this job being performed, something we currently produce no longer will be. If the job losses are due to the lack of productivity these positions enable, then removing low productivity positions seems to be an improvement to the machine. As Elon Musk has noted in a recent interview by Ron Barron, is that part of his first principles process for improving the machines he builds, cars, factories, companies or machines in their own right, is to remove all unneeded parts. As an example, Musk shared how Tesla was making its cars with some metal beam that required a specific weld that was holding up the production line. After inquiring about the purpose of the beam, it was revealed that the crash safety team forgot to inform the production team the bar was not needed and should be deleted. Elon said the first step to his first principles algorithm was to make the constraints and requirements you are given less dumb. Whatever was given is to some degree dumb, and we want to make it less dumb. His point progressed into comparing some of the random chores he is tasked to do around the factory as comparable to a Dilbert cartoon, and proposed the Dilbert ratio as an important metric to minimize. What is the ratio of things a machine does or is composed of purely unnecessarily to the things it actually needs in order to function? How many parts or processes can be completely removed and no performative change occurs? The more of those that exist in your machine, the higher your Dilbert ratio. To a large extent, this is the process we see Elon taking at Twitter right now. He is in a process of reducing Twitter's Dilbert ratio. Shedding the employees that were unneeded for the machine to operate, removing the free lunches that were just going to waste. Another example seen in this tweet stating Twitter is no longer stamping tweets with data about what device a tweet was written on. Mentioning no one knows why this feature was added in the first place. At Sampolora, and we will finally stop adding what device a tweet was written on, waste of screen space and compute, below every tweet. Literally no one even knows why we did that. To return back to my argument on the economy, machines sometimes have parts they don't need. So if these jobs are unneeded and the productive output of the METI machine is unchanged by the termination of these jobs, it should be viewed as an improvement to the METI machine. Can Apple make the same amount of iPhones as it was before their layoffs? The machine is now only less doing things that didn't need to be done. Now those workers have been freed to contribute to the labor needs the machine actually needs done and benefits from. The machine is only improved and more enabled to the extent we trim the unneeded pieces. If the economic Dilbert ratio is lower, we have a better machine. Of course, I make an assumption here that these jobs were not essential roles to the machine, and if that is disagreed with, I welcome that line of reasoning, but as I write, my argument is making the assumption that these jobs were bloat rather than essential pieces. An argument could exist that now a greater quantity of people are unemployed, a less quantity of consumption will occur, and the flow of capital slows. Commerce downstream of the laid-off laborer salaries shrinks. Well, perhaps this is the case, but this worry will be temporary to the timescale people find new jobs, and in the meantime they will still have an allowance of consumption. So the severity of productive impact will be some amount less extreme than the combined salary amount that was terminated. This capital will still be available to deploy, but just at the command of the needs of the company instead of the individual. Areas of the economy that experience a shrinking of consumption will be offset at least in part by another area that experiences an increase. Ultimately, the point I try to make is that the economy just reaches a less error resource allocation state. If a job isn't even supposed to exist, then downstream production it supports is likely distorted in quantity, quality, and efficiency from the optimal machine. To the extent the net production of all laid-off workers is above zero, then perhaps we see a slowing of the economy as Sachs predicts. Until this labor gets reallocated and the lost production is resumed in just a better allocated manner. My larger point is that this detail shouldn't be viewed as harmful to the economy, but rather cleansing and a refining of the machine, resulting in a machine with only a higher capacity of producing all the shit we like being produced. As I see and assess the economy is that it is only a better performing machine currently than it was during the stock market highs or pre-COVID life. The intrinsic value of the economy grows every instance a worker is laid off from Dilbert employment. If I could buy one of two machines, the METI machine of 2019 or the METI machine of 2022, I would buy the 2022 machine. As I understand the economy, I believe it is in a period of massive and rapid improvement and on the brink of a motherfucking takeoff. As automation and AI advance, they represent breakthroughs in productive output. Using Stable Diffusion or a future descendant of the technology instead of 200 movies/shows produced a year, AI will soon be capable of generating a movie in any style, length, or name your constraint with only a click of a button. Our media production may become 200 movies and shows per second for much less resources. Automation is making things humans have to currently do to be done without a human. Is the better economy/machine the one where people have to do everything, or it just does it itself? Would you rather a coffee maker you have to grind beans, roast, etc. yourself, or one that does it for you? Automation of some very significant economic roles, such as driving, is quickly approaching the human competency threshold. What amount more things is humanity enabled to accomplish when a task often comprising hours of our day and is the essential work of many jobs is no longer required to be performed by a human? What economic activity is this recaptured time capable of generating, and additionally, what is the natural amount of driving that would take place if not constrained by how many humans are available to do the task? These are only a couple examples of ways economic activity could massively increase in a short amount of time. There are additional innovations emerging as well capable of driving extreme economic growth, a machine capable of more things. I mention AI and automation because they are very closely linked, and also the gain value of the technologies are intuitive to grasp. I am largely in the Carthywood camp of belief that innovation in many areas are developing in parallel. Each of them will broadly impact and update our economy to a much more capable machine. I expect a likely rebuttal to my argument will be in relation to the actions of the Fed's interest rate rises and the effect this has on the real-world functions of the machine. Undoubtedly, monetary policy has significant effect on the METI machine. Personally, I would like the Fed to have a more hands-off approach and let the machine self-correct to the new monetary base, instead of drastically manipulating M2 stock in both directions. I would advocate to let the waves disperse instead of attempting to inject a counter wave without a clear understanding of the propagation pattern. If done perfectly, then perhaps it is the right or optimal action, but there looms a risk of amplifying the waves already in motion. The more the Fed influences the quantity of money in the system, it is making money a less information-bearing tool. Just as the engine is a part to the car and a worker is a part to the METI machine, money is also part of the META machine, acting as the information transferring plumbing in which supply and demand information is communicated and stored. The worse this part functions, the less the machine will make the things we most want made. In the long term, however, I expect this to become a trivial threat to the performance of the METI machine. The machine will adjust to the system most apt to transfer the information it wishes to exchange. In my opinion, and perhaps the topic of a future writing, crypto is just capable of more exchange channels and information precision than legacy fiat currency. Because of this, I expect to the degree the USD continues to be manipulated away from its most useful form, it is accelerating humanity's transition to a more useful information exchange and storage mechanism. So even this detail could be viewed as an improvement to the machine. The machine becoming larger is not the only metric in determining if it is a better machine, and often economic sentiment and arguments are in regard to that detail, which I think is framing that misses the point. It is currently the safer, easier opinion to believe the economy is getting worse, not better, so I am in the contrarian seat with this perspective. Something I respect about Sachs is his willingness to stand on a position regardless of consensus or social expectation. So that is what I am doing in this critique, purely representing and defending the state of reality as I most intuit in the privacy of my own mind. I hope I argued strongly that the economy is gearing for massive improvement and has already been positively iterated on from its pre-COVID status. I tried to demonstrate and argue that the popular sentiment of economic worsening is perhaps a too surface-level scope. I respect David Sachs and enjoy hearing his takes. So I only argue in good faith and try to honestly represent the topic as I most genuinely see it. By all means, any other good faith critique of my thoughts are welcome and appreciated. Thanks for reading Braindead's newsletter. Subscribe for free to receive new posts and support my work.
For more Brain Dead content, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe to the Brain Dead newsletter, and follow on Twitter. Links in the description.